Early one stormy morning, Anna is jolted awake when her young son, Jane, climbs into her bed. Full of energy, he begs her to go swimming in the pool with him. But Anna gently reminds him that she has work to do and that he's supposed to be at kindergarten. Before the conversation can go any further, a deafening crack of thunder shakes the apartment. Curious, Anna walks to the window and sees heavy rain pouring down as water begins to collect along the street below. Although it looks bad, she assumes it's still manageable and continues with her morning routine. As Anna prepares breakfast, she struggles to keep up with Jane's playful but irritating behavior. Her mother calls to check on her safety after hearing about the storm, but Anna reassures her that everything is under control. Moments later, Anna hears an unusual sloshing sound and assumes it's coming from the bathroom. When she turns around, she's horrified to find water spreading rapidly across the floor. The flood has risen so quickly that it's now pressing against her apartment windows. A building-wide announcement soon follows, warning residents that floodwaters have reached the second and even third floors in several buildings. Everyone is ordered to evacuate upward immediately, as the elevators are no longer working. Jane, oblivious to the danger, keeps shouting and asking to play. Overwhelmed, Anna finally loses her patience and scolds him, lifting him onto the table so he'll stay put while she hurriedly starts packing. By then, the water is already creeping up her legs. Suddenly, Anna receives a call from a security officer from her workplace, who tells her he's on his way to help. He urges her not to waste time gathering belongings and insists she head upstairs with Jane right away. The call abruptly cuts off as the power goes out. Anna quickly grabs a small bag containing Jane's medication and rushes to find him. Hurt and frightened, Jane has hidden inside a closet. Realizing she was too harsh, Anna apologizes and comforts him, convincing him to come out by offering him a piggyback ride. When they step into the hallway, chaos surrounds them. Neighbors rush past with bags and suitcases, all trying to escape. Anna weaves through the crowd, desperate to reach the stairwell, but finds it completely jammed with panicked residents. With no other choice, she runs in the opposite direction and notices that nearby buildings are facing the same disaster. She finally locates an emergency stairwell and begins climbing. As they ascend, Jane notices people swimming below in the murky floodwater. To calm him, Anna softly sings. After reaching a higher level, their escape is blocked by debris piled across the stairs. Anna carefully sets Jane down and tries to climb over it, but she slips and nearly falls. She manages to catch herself, but the sight of lifeless bodies floating below makes her realize how deadly the situation has become. She decides to retreat. On another floor, people break into apartments just to use the bathrooms. Anna suddenly hears her name and spots the company's security agent searching for her. She's about to run toward him when she realizes Jane has wandered into one of the apartments with the crowd. She rushes inside, calling out for him, then freezes as she sees a massive wave rushing toward the window. The sight triggers a traumatic memory of being trapped underwater in a car with her husband, Kwon, during the accident that killed him. The wave crashes through the glass, violently flooding the apartment and knocking people aside. Anna loses her bag and briefly tries to chase it, but it drifts away through the shattered window. Running out of air, she surfaces just enough to take a breath before diving back underwater to find Jane. In another room, she discovers her son unconscious. She grabs him and struggles toward the exit, but the door won't budge. Exhausted and out of oxygen, Anna blacks out. Moments later, the security agent, Hae, breaks in, revives Anna, and helps carry Jane out. Together, they swim upward, climb over a balcony railing, and return to the hallway. Hae immediately performs CPR on Jane, bringing him back to life. Jane wakes up crying and clings tightly to his mother. Hae records proof of their rescue and sends it to the company, confirming that their lead researcher is safe. As they continue moving upstairs, Jane admits that the rising water reminds him of the day his father died, trapped in the car. Hae then reveals the grim truth. A helicopter is on the way, but it may not matter. 3 hours earlier, an asteroid struck Antarctica, causing massive ice melt that is now surging north with the ocean. The government knew the impact was coming, but kept it secret because there was no way to stop it. The flood is only the beginning, and humanity is facing its final day. Anna is stunned by what Hae-so tells her and struggles to accept it. Seeing her disbelief, Hae-so explains that her company was never just an AI research facility. In truth, her work was meant to help design an entirely new version of humanity. Only 2 scientists were assigned to complete the emotional core of this new race: Anna herself and her superior, who tragically drowned in the flood along with her own child. Anna insists that the emotion engine was incomplete and still undergoing trials, but Hae-so brushes her concerns aside. According to him, every other team has already finished their tasks. Artificial human bodies have been created, capable of independent thought and reproduction. The only missing element is emotion. Their tense discussion is suddenly cut short when Jane blurts out that he urgently needs to use the bathroom. With no time to waste, they rush into the nearest apartment. While Jane is inside, Anna borrows Hae-so's phone and quickly calls her mother, choking back tears as she tells her she loves her. Before they can leave, strange noises echo through the walls. Without warning, a gas pipe in the kitchen detonates. Gas floods the apartment, forcing the 3 of them to flee into the corridor. Explosions erupt throughout the building as neighboring apartments catch fire, flames racing along both sides of the hallway. Hae-so climbs onto the balcony railing to reach the next level and signals Anna to hand Jane to him. But Jane panics and clings to her, refusing to let go. His struggle throws Anna off balance, and she plunges into the flood below. A traumatic memory of the car accident flashes through her mind, but she forces herself to fight back to the surface and grabs onto a sign to steady herself. Determined, Anna swims back toward the building. She suddenly hears a child named Jisoo crying from inside a submerged elevator. Anna desperately tries to pry the doors open with her bare hands, but they won't budge. She runs upstairs in search of something to break them open, but along the way, she overhears disturbing voices from an apartment, people talking about attacking others. Terrified, she retreats. When Anna returns to the elevator, the water level has risen even higher. Hae-so no longer responds. Moments later, another massive wave slams into the building, dragging Anna underwater once again. As she sinks, memories resurface of smashing the car window, of Kwon urging her to swim ahead while he held Jane. Kwon grew weaker, collapsing in the water, and in his final act, he pushed their son toward Anna and told her to go on without him. Snapping back to the present, Anna breaks the surface near the stairwell and scrambles upward, racing to reunite with Jane and Hae-so. Jane looks pale and unwell. He needs his medicine, which Anna lost earlier. Without hesitation, she scoops him up and runs back toward the apartments, determined to find something to help him. Hae-so tries to stop her, coldly reminding her that Jane can be recreated using stored data if he dies. Anna refuses to accept that idea. She breaks into a random apartment, scavenges ingredients from the kitchen, and prepares a traditional remedy, gently administering it to Jane. Another memory surfaces. Anna speaking to her boss, Hae-so. She confesses that she once considered giving Jane up. When Hae-so asks if it's because of Kwon's death, Anna explains that Jane only exists because of her work and admits she doesn't believe she's fit to be a mother. Hae-so tells her no one is ever ready and reveals that the emotion engine is finally complete. Soon, the company plans to take the children they created. Hae-so quietly wonders if they should have ever brought them into existence at all. Back in the present, Jane's condition improves thanks to the homemade medicine. He shyly admits that sometimes he likes being sick because it makes Anna pay more attention to him. When they glance outside, they're shocked to see sunlight. The storm has seemingly ended. Hae-so informs Anna that she'll be transported to a shelter, but Jane won't be going with her. He admits he never came for the project itself. He came to see what Anna would choose. He also reveals that his own mother abandoned him when he was young. Just then, the sky darkens again. Rain pours down violently, and water begins flooding the building at a terrifying speed. The trio races up the stairs, finally escaping the rising water. Along the way, Anna notices a pregnant couple pleading for help, but Hyo urges her to ignore them and keep moving. Jane innocently asks Anna if she felt the same fear when she was pregnant with him. The question breaks her. She collapses in tears, overwhelmed. When Hyo checks on her, Anna snaps, screaming that she refuses to abandon her child. Hyo explains that with Hyunimo gone and her child dead, Jane is now the only remaining key to humanity's future. He is the final hope. They reach the rooftop where the helicopter awaits. Hyo reads the company's final instructions. Human extinction must be prevented at all costs. Anna is ordered to return to the lab immediately to complete the emotion engine. The security team escorts Jane, now labeled Newman 77, away from her. They restrain Anna as she watches helplessly, her son in handcuffs, screaming as he is taken from her. Desperate and broken, Anna pleads with Hyo to help her. After a long pause, he finally reveals the truth. Hyunimo never died. She escaped with her child, choosing certain death over a future where she would be forced to abandon her daughter. Meanwhile, the security team sedates Jane with an injection and begins shaving his hair. Anna panics, screaming and begging them to stop. She drops to her knees, pleading for mercy, asking only to stay with her son until they reach the shelter. The guards coldly inform her there is no shelter at all. In the next moment, they execute Hyo on the spot. Anna realizes the horrifying truth. Everyone is meant to die here. She alone is permitted to leave. After a final, tear-filled goodbye, the men slice open Jane's head to extract his stored data, sealing it inside a small container. The helicopter lifts off carrying only the pilot, the data box, and Anna. As the storm consumes the planet below, Anna discovers Jane's goggles still tucked inside her pocket. Across the world, 7 rockets launch into space, carrying the remaining scientists involved in the project. A pre-recorded message from director Hae-so explains that within 15 minutes, thousands of meteor fragments will strike Earth, wiping out nearly all life. The mission must continue beyond the planet. The team already knows how to print physical human bodies. Intelligence and reproduction are complete. What's missing is emotion. The plan is simple and cruel. A mother and a child are needed to form the foundation of a new society. The child has already been perfected. Only the mother remains unfinished. Anna proposes a solution. Place the mother inside a simulation that repeatedly forces her to endure extreme hardship while trying to save her child. By reliving loss, fear, sacrifice, and love over and over again, the system can harvest the full spectrum of human emotion in a fraction of the time. As meteor fragments close in on the rockets, Anna connects to the simulation. She wakes up in her bed. This time, water is already seeping into the apartment. Her phone rings. It's Hae-so again, saying rescue is on the way. Anna remembers her conversation with Hyunimo and realizes how this ends. The guards will come for Jane. She grabs the medicine and sternly tells Jane to listen carefully and never follow strangers. Jane starts crying, accusing her of lying, asking why he's always 6 years old every single day. Ignoring his questions, Anna lifts him into her arms and rushes for the stairs, only to find both directions packed with fleeing residents. Then the massive wave crashes into the building. Anna clutches Jane tightly and swims upward. She helps him climb over a railing into the corridor and pulls herself up after him. But Jane is gone. Panic surges through her. She runs through the hallway until another wave forces her to stop. Looking between buildings, she spots Jane struggling in the water. Anna dives in, but the current is too strong. As a helicopter appears overhead, a memory flashes, another simulation. She feels something in her pocket. Jane's goggles. A floating car slams into her from behind. Everything goes black. Anna jolts back to life as Hae-so performs chest compressions on her. The number 787 is printed on her uniform, the number of failed simulation attempts. Hae-so shows her a photo taken earlier, revealing that Jane never entered the water. The child she saw drowning wasn't him. Anna bolts to her feet, demanding answers. When Hae-so tries to stop her, she grabs his gun and fires into the floor, forcing him to explain. Anna urges Ji-soo to come with her, warning that the apartment will soon be underwater. Ji-soo refuses, explaining that the elderly couple are her grandparents and she won't abandon them. Shortly after, Hae-so receives a call from the company. He tells Anna that a search team is on the way with a boat to sweep the entire building for Jane. The memory of Jane being cut open flashes through Anna's mind. She knows she can't wait. She has to find him first. This is now simulation 7993. As Anna searches floor by floor, she witnesses security agents executing looters without hesitation. On another level, she notices a child's drawings scrawled on a wall. The sight reminds her of how Jane used to send her drawings through his tablet, especially one shaped like a heart. Fighting back tears, she keeps moving. She soon encounters the pregnant woman from earlier, now in labor. Anna helps her hold the newborn and offers her jacket for warmth. As she leaves, she sees the father returning with warm water to clean the baby. The moment fills Anna with guilt over all the times she neglected Jane. She remembers how he constantly sent her drawings that she rarely acknowledged. She checks her phone. There are thousands of images, drawings of her leaving Jane behind, again and again, before boarding the helicopter. Suddenly, Hae-so shouts from another floor, saying he's found Jane. Anna sprints toward the sound, but the moment she enters the apartment, agents tackle her from behind and restrain her. Hae-so calmly tells her they'll wake her on the roof so she can say goodbye. Anna bitterly reminds him that he dies on the roof every single time. It's revealed this is his simulation 13,417. When Hae-so presses for answers, the agents shove him aside. On his way back, fragments of previous simulations finally break through his memory. He grabs a heavy trophy from a shelf and attacks the guards. One agent recovers quickly and raises his weapon, but Anna, half conscious, snatches another gun and fires, saving Hae-so. Afterward, Hae-so injects Anna with a stimulant to fully wake her and demands the truth. She explains everything, that she's failed to save Jane in every run. She admits they've had this exact conversation before, and they've even tried fighting the agents together, but always died. Anna fears that Jane may not even want to see her anymore. Hae-so insists the opposite, that the boy is waiting for her. Simulation 21,499. Anna and Hae-so are once again caught in a firefight with the agents. This time, Hae-so suggests a different approach. They escape through a window and race across another floor. In the corridors, Hae-so fights an agent hand-to-hand, then deliberately stays behind to distract them so Anna can continue searching. Anna bursts into an empty apartment, only to be ambushed again. Before the agents can restrain her, a massive wave crashes through the window, throwing everyone apart. Freed by the chaos, Anna swims through the flooded structure, still unable to locate Jane. Realizing the water level has risen enough, she heads upward. She reaches the roof. Inside an abandoned wardrobe, she finally finds Jane, unconscious. Anna immediately gives him the medicine, but nothing happens. She collapses, sobbing, apologizing for leaving him behind so many times. Then Jane opens his eyes. Calmly, he tells her she never abandoned him. When she said goodbye, she told him to hide in the wardrobe and wait for her, and she always came back. At the same time, the truth is revealed. Meteor fragments struck the rocket carrying Anna, mortally wounding her. Before dying, she begged the director to upload her mind into the simulation so she could stay with Jane. The scientists extracted her memories and preserved them, hoping her emotional experiences would help humanity survive. Back on the rooftop, agents close in as a colossal wave approaches. Anna hands Jane his goggles and tells him to swim. He jumps into the water as the guard sees her. Another memory surfaces. Jane and Hyenamo's child were never naturally born. They were printed by the company to develop child-level AI. That's why the agents believed they could be abandoned. Only their data mattered. Jane met Kwon after the experiment had already begun. Still, Kwon chose to be his father and truly loved him. When Kwon died, the loss shaped both Anna and Jane. As the simulation begins to reset once more, Anna breaks free from the agents and dives into the flood. She falls through streams of data and water before resurfacing beside Jane, who clings to an antenna. She wraps her arms around him, promising they'll swim together, just before another wave engulfs them. This time, Anna helps Jisoo. She supports the pregnant woman. She never leaves Jane's side. The system recognizes her selflessness and finally marks the simulation as successful. New bodies are printed. The AIs of Anna and Jane are placed within them. They are sent to a distant planet, carrying humanity's memories to begin a new society. Analysis. What if the greatest enemy wasn't a monster, wasn't a villain, but water itself? Not the kind that crashes down in a single moment, but the kind that rises slowly, silently, trapping you piece by piece, cutting off escape, hope, and control. The Great Flood isn't just another disaster movie about collapsing buildings or heroic last stands. It's a story about what happens before the world ends, when warnings are ignored, systems fail, and ordinary people are forced to choose between survival and humanity. Floods are terrifying because they don't attack all at once. They wait. They surround. And by the time you realize how serious it is, it's already too late. This film takes that fear and turns it into a tense, emotionally charged experience. One that's less about spectacle and more about human behavior under pressure. Fear, sacrifice, selfishness, courage, everything rises along with the water. In this video, we're breaking down the Great Flood from every angle. The story, the themes, the hidden details, the ending, and whether this disaster film truly stands out or sinks under its own weight. So if you're ready to dive into a movie where survival isn't guaranteed and every decision matters, let's begin. Released in 2025, The Great Flood arrives at a time when disaster movies are no longer just about destruction. They're about consequences. At its core, this film blends disaster, thriller, and drama, but it doesn't rush to overwhelm you with chaos. Instead, it builds tension patiently, letting unease grow before the full scale of the catastrophe reveals itself. The story is set in a heavily populated region where daily life feels stable, almost routine. But beneath that normalcy, something is already wrong. Environmental warnings exist, subtle signs are present, yet like so many real-world crises, they're underestimated, delayed, or ignored. When the flood begins, it doesn't announce itself with explosions or spectacle. It creeps in. Streets disappear. Safe zones shrink. Systems people rely on, transport, communication, authority, start to fail one by one. What makes this movie stand out is its spoiler-free premise. Ordinary people facing an extraordinary disaster, without guarantees of rescue, heroism, or happy endings. This isn't a story about saving the world. It's about surviving it. And as the situation escalates, the film makes one thing clear. Nature doesn't negotiate, and not everyone will make the right choices when the pressure rises. On the surface, The Great Flood fits neatly into the disaster genre, but the destruction is only part of the story. Yes, the film delivers everything you'd expect from a disaster thriller. Rising danger, collapsing systems, and a constant sense that time is running out. But unlike traditional disaster movies that rely on spectacle and heroics, this one slows things down. The tension comes not from explosions, but from waiting, from uncertainty, from knowing that escape routes are disappearing one by one. At its heart, this is a survival story, and survival isn't just physical. The film constantly puts its characters in situations where every choice has a moral cost. Do you help others when resources are limited? Do you trust strangers when fear takes over? Or do you protect yourself, no matter the consequences? These choices turn the flood into more than a natural disaster. It becomes a test of character. Emotionally, the film carries a heavy tone. There's anxiety in every frame, claustrophobia in every confined space, and a lingering sense of helplessness as nature continues to advance. Hope exists, but it's fragile, easily drowned out by panic and loss. Because of this, The Great Flood isn't designed for viewers looking for light entertainment or nonstop action. It's aimed at audiences who appreciate realism, psychological tension, and stories that reflect how people truly behave when control is stripped away. This is a disaster movie, but more importantly, it's a human one. The ending of the Great Flood does not revolve around defeating the disaster, because that was never truly possible. As the flood reaches its peak, the remaining survivors come to a painful realization. There is no last-minute rescue, no miraculous solution, and no heroic act that can undo what has already happened. Nature has made its decision. All that's left is endurance. In the final moments, the water begins to recede, not as a victory, but as a consequence of time. The flood leaves behind shattered spaces, broken systems, and lives permanently altered. Survival comes at a cost, and the film makes sure the audience feels that weight. What actually happened is simple, but powerful. Some people survive, some don't, and nothing returns to the way it was before. The disaster doesn't end with triumph. It ends with aftermath. Symbolically, the ending reinforces the film's central message. The flood represents more than a natural event. It represents human denial, delayed action, and the illusion of control. When the water finally pulls back, it exposes the truth. What failed wasn't just infrastructure, but judgment. The survivors are left standing not as heroes, but as witnesses. They carry memory, guilt, loss, and responsibility forward. The film intentionally avoids a comforting conclusion, reminding us that real disasters don't offer closure. They offer lessons. There's also an open interpretation built into the final scenes. The silence after the storm isn't relief, it's reflection. The audience is left to ask, did humanity learn anything? Or will the cycle repeat when the next warning is ignored? The ending doesn't answer that question. And that's the point. Beneath the surface-level disaster, the Great Flood hides layers of visual storytelling that many viewers miss on a first watch. The most obvious symbol, of course, is water, but it's never treated as just a physical threat. As the flood rises, so does emotional pressure. Early scenes often show water in controlled, contained spaces, pipes, drains, distant shorelines. As the story progresses, water begins invading homes, streets, and finally personal spaces, mirroring how fear and chaos move from public to deeply personal. One recurring visual detail is the use of confined spaces. Elevators, stairwells, rooftops, and narrow corridors appear repeatedly. These aren't random locations. They reinforce the feeling of being trapped, both physically and psychologically. Even when characters are technically safe, the camera framing makes escape feel impossible. Another subtle detail is the presence of broken or abandoned objects. Stalled vehicles, floating furniture, abandoned shoes, and silent phones appear in the background. These objects quietly remind us of lives interrupted mid-moment, reinforcing the idea that disaster doesn't wait for closure. The film also uses foreshadowing through sound and silence. Early background noises, distant sirens, dripping water, muffled announcements, later disappear entirely. By the final act, silence dominates, signaling not peace, but exhaustion and loss. It's a quiet way of telling the audience that the world hasn't recovered. It's simply stopped screaming. There are also subtle narrative Easter eggs tied to ignored warnings. Early dialogue mentions reports, alerts, or concerns that are brushed aside. These moments seem insignificant at first, but in hindsight, they become tragic signposts pointing to everything that could have been prevented. Nothing in these details is accidental. The film uses them to reinforce its core message. Disasters don't arrive suddenly. They're built through neglect, denial, and delay. And the more closely you watch, the clearer it becomes that the flood was never the only danger. Behind the intensity of the Great Flood lies a production process that was just as demanding as the story it tells. One of the most striking behind-the-scenes facts is how heavily the filmmakers relied on practical water effects. Instead of using digital flooding for every scene, large sections were shot in controlled, water-filled sets. This decision wasn't just about realism. It allowed actors to physically feel exhaustion, resistance, and panic, which translated directly into more believable performances. To prepare for their roles, several cast members reportedly underwent water safety and survival training. This included learning how to move in strong currents, remain calm in submerged environments, and perform scenes while partially restrained by water pressure. The goal was simple: make every reaction feel instinctive, not acted. From a production standpoint, filming water is notoriously difficult. Lighting behaves differently, sound becomes unpredictable, and continuity is harder to maintain. The crew had to coordinate scenes with extreme precision, often limiting the number of takes to ensure safety while still capturing emotional authenticity. There's also trivia hidden in the film structure. Certain intense sequences were intentionally shot later in the schedule, after weeks of filming, so the actors would naturally appear more fatigued, adding to the realism without artificial makeup or effects. Some deleted or trimmed scenes reportedly focused on extended backstories for side characters. These were removed to maintain pacing, keeping the narrative tight and focused on survival rather than exposition. All of these behind-the-scenes choices reflect the filmmaker's commitment to grounding the movie in realism. The result is a disaster film that doesn't just show struggle. It feels like it was built through it. When placed alongside other disaster films, The Great Flood takes a noticeably different path. Traditional disaster movies often focus on scale, massive destruction, global stakes, and heroic figures racing against time. Many rely on spectacle to keep audiences engaged. The Great Flood, however, shifts the focus inward. The danger feels closer, more personal, and far less cinematic in the traditional sense. Compared to high-energy disaster films, this movie is slower and more restrained. It prioritizes tension over action and atmosphere over visual excess. Instead of showcasing how impressive the disaster looks, it asks how people react when escape isn't guaranteed and help may never arrive. In terms of survival storytelling, the film aligns more closely with grounded survival dramas than blockbuster catastrophe movies. It shares similarities with stories where isolation, limited resources, and moral decisions drive the narrative, yet it distinguishes itself by keeping the threat constant and inescapable. Where the movie excels is in realism. Human behavior feels believable. Fear leads to mistakes. Leadership fails under pressure, and cooperation is fragile. There are no exaggerated heroes, and victories are small, often bittersweet. That said, this approach may not work for everyone. Viewers expecting non-stop action or large-scale destruction may find the pacing slow. Some genre rivals offer more spectacle, more set pieces, and clearer villains. The Great Flood intentionally avoids those comforts. Ultimately, what this movie does better than many of its genre peers is emotional authenticity. What it sacrifices is traditional excitement. And whether that trade-off works depends entirely on what kind of disaster story you're looking for. Since its release, The Great Flood has sparked a noticeably divided reaction. And that response says a lot about the kind of film it is. Among general audiences, reactions leaned strongly emotional. Many viewers praised the movie for its realism, tension, and unsettling atmosphere. Instead of calling it fun, audiences often described it as stressful, heavy, or uncomfortable, but in a way that felt intentional. For these viewers, the film succeeded because it felt real, not entertaining in the traditional sense. Others, however, were less receptive. Some audience members expected a faster pace, bigger action sequences, or clearer heroic arcs. For them, the film felt slow or emotionally draining, especially compared to more spectacle-driven disaster movies. Critics mirrored this split. Supporters applauded the grounded approach, noting the film's focus on human behavior, moral choices, and environmental realism. They highlighted its restraint, praising the decision to let tension build naturally rather than relying on constant visual chaos. More critical reviews pointed to the same qualities as weaknesses. The restrained pacing, minimal exposition, and lack of conventional payoff made the film feel bleak or overly serious to some critics. As a result, The Great Flood occupies an interesting space. It's neither universally praised nor widely dismissed. It's a divisive film, one that resonates deeply with the right audience while leaving others cold. Over time, this kind of reception often works in a movie's favor. Films that challenge expectations tend to age better than those that simply follow formulas. And that raises the final question. Is The Great Flood flawed or simply misunderstood? So where does The Great Flood ultimately stand? Its greatest strength lies in its authenticity. The film doesn't chase spectacle or easy victories. Instead, it delivers a tense, immersive experience that treats disaster as something slow, suffocating, and deeply human. The atmosphere is heavy, the performances feel grounded, and the emotional weight never lets up. The film also deserves credit for its restraint. By focusing on moral choices, psychological pressure, and realistic consequences, it separates itself from formula-driven disaster movies. Every survival feels earned. Every loss feels permanent. That said, this approach comes with trade-offs. From this point on, spoilers are unavoidable, so consider this your warning if you'd rather go in blind. The Great Flood turned out to be nothing like what I expected. Despite its title and marketing, this isn't really a disaster movie at heart. Instead, it's a story about artificial intelligence, wrapped in a structure that recalls films like Edge of Tomorrow, Triangle, and even Groundhog Day. The film opens strongly with a mother, Na, and her 6-year-old son, Jun, waking up in a city overwhelmed by flooding. An asteroid impact in Antarctica has caused ice melt and rising sea levels, and before long, their own apartment begins to fill with water. As they flee upward, chaos erupts, and Jun becomes separated from his mother. A security officer named Hae-so arrives to help, and we soon learn that Na is a doctor who developed an emotion generator, a system designed to give artificial intelligence human feelings. Just when the film still seems committed to its disaster setup, everything resets, and then resets again and again. It's eventually revealed that Earth has already been destroyed, and the remaining humans are aboard a spaceship, running simulations in an effort to perfect emotionally capable AI. A clever visual clue lies in Na's t-shirt, which displays a different number in each loop, signaling a new simulation every time. The flood itself turns out to be nothing more than a test scenario, designed to measure a mother's determination to find her child, and more broadly, to test the limits of artificial intelligence. At its core, the film is really about human choice. I understand why this movie frustrated so many viewers. It begins as one kind of film, transforms into something else, and then changes direction yet again. Each new reveal undermines what came before it. On top of that, the pacing is slow, packed with emotional scenes that often feel unnecessary. Just when it seems like the story is finally moving forward, it loops back to the start. Still, despite all these issues, the film is undeniably ambitious. It aims for deeper themes than your average big-budget apocalypse story. To truly engage with it, you almost have to stop focusing on the surface narrative and instead view it as a conceptual project, searching for the symbolism beneath the events. I can't say that I genuinely enjoyed watching it. It isn't especially entertaining, but I do respect the ideas behind it. The filmmakers clearly set out to craft a traditional disaster movie first, relying on familiar genre elements. Then, perhaps trying to be too clever, they abruptly shift gears midway through by revealing that everything is part of a massive AI-controlled simulation. Action sequences, space settings, and time loops are layered on top. In theory, these ingredients could have blended into something unique, but the script simply lacks the cohesion and restraint needed to make it work. Instead, it feels like an overstuffed concept piece, bursting with ideas but lacking discipline. Even the emotional core, the bond between mother and son, fails to fully resonate. The film tries very hard to force those feelings through heavy music cues and repeated flashbacks, but the relationship never develops naturally. As a result, the intended emotional impact doesn't really land. Structurally, the movie is clearly divided into two halves. The opening portion functions well as a disaster film and is easily the strongest part. A massive flood striking a modern city in a non-biblical context feels fresh, and the pacing here is excellent. The water rises almost immediately, surging past windows and climbing multiple floors in what feels like minutes. The sense of urgency is effective and engaging. Unfortunately, the characters weaken this section. Many of them are irritating, and the child character is especially frustrating, written as oblivious to the point of disbelief. For instance, a scene where a child complains about needing the bathroom during a crisis comes across as overly silly and breaks the tension completely. The dubbed dialogue makes matters worse. The voices often sound unnatural, excessively loud, and at times grating. As a result, emotional scenes lose their weight, and it becomes difficult to connect with the characters. The screenplay also lacks clarity, particularly when dealing with the AI children and the experimental storyline. Important plot points feel rushed or underdeveloped, and character motivations don't always make sense. The film frequently jumps between intense action and strange comedic moments without smooth transitions, making the narrative feel scattered. Although the flood sequences are meant to heighten suspense, they often feel chaotic rather than thrilling. Visually, the direction and cinematography show flashes of creativity, with some well-framed shots and moments of tension. Unfortunately, these highlights are too infrequent to carry the film. While the production aims high, strong visuals alone can't make up for a confusing story and distracting audio choices. In the end, the film didn't work for me. Despite its high-concept ambition, the exaggerated dubbing, uneven tone, and messy storytelling made it difficult to enjoy. While some viewers may appreciate its experimental nature, I found it more frustrating than engaging and can't personally recommend it. That said, I do think there's a clever idea buried within the film. What begins as a story about a mother, Anna, and her son struggling to survive a catastrophic flood caused by an asteroid impact eventually flips into a mind-bending sci-fi narrative that challenges perception and reality. I like the direction the story ultimately took, and the cast deserves praise for their performances. At its best, the film is thought-provoking and imaginative. Overall, The Great Flood presents itself as an end-of-the-world science fiction disaster story. Anna, an AI researcher, wakes to find her apartment filling with water. She escapes with her son as residents panic, balconies overflow with people, and massive waves threaten the high-rise. With the help of a security agent from her company, she makes her way toward potential rescue. Along the way, it's revealed that fragments of an asteroid struck Antarctica, accelerating ice melt, information that had been hidden from the public for years. From there, the film explores artificial intelligence and synthetic life, making it difficult to say more without spoiling key developments. The special effects are solid, featuring large-scale flooding, frantic crowd scenes, and intense confrontations. However, the plot is slightly overcomplicated, and shaving off 10 to 15 minutes could have made it tighter and more effective. When I first saw the teaser, my expectations were high. Unfortunately, the final result didn't match what I had envisioned. While the premise was exciting on paper, the storytelling felt unclear and overly complicated, which ultimately kept me from fully enjoying the film. The idea behind The Great Flood is undeniably interesting. On paper, it feels fresh and full of promise, but unfortunately, the execution never quite lives up to that potential. The central character is engaging and easy to root for, yet her development feels incomplete, as if the script never fully commits to exploring her depth. The opening act is easily the film's strongest section. It's tense, energetic, and packed with suspense, setting expectations for a gripping survival story. Sadly, once the film moves into its second and third acts, everything begins to fall apart. The momentum collapses, and the story veers in a direction that feels disconnected from what was initially promised. Instead of enhancing the narrative, the shift undermines it. The latter half feels like an entirely different movie, and not in a good way. What could have been a focused disaster survival experience becomes cluttered with ideas that are never properly explained. The ending, in particular, is vague and confusing, offering little clarity or emotional payoff. Rather than feeling thought-provoking, it comes across as unfinished and poorly thought out. Because of this, it's hard for me to recommend the film to anyone. While the movie attempts to merge science fiction with a large-scale disaster, the balance never quite works. The sci-fi angle, especially the time loop concept, feels forced and overambitious. At its core, the story is supposed to revolve around a powerful mother and son bond, yet the relationship never feels strong enough to support the emotional weight the film demands. Key details about their connection are scattered and underdeveloped, making the emotional payoff ineffective. That said, the film isn't entirely unbearable. The performances are mostly solid, even if the child character becomes frustrating due to repetitive behavior and weak writing. Visually, the movie does shine at times. Its special effects are impressive, with striking lighting choices that add atmosphere, even if their symbolism is unclear. The constant action keeps the film from becoming dull, though the repetition of massive waves and destruction eventually loses its impact. The themes themselves aren't particularly new. Humanity, depending on artificial intelligence for survival, has been explored countless times, as has the disaster movie formula. Initially, combining these two ideas works in the film's favor, creating intrigue and emotional engagement. But once the time loop element takes over, that emotional connection fades, and the story becomes increasingly hollow. Supporting characters barely receive any development, leaving no lasting impression. Despite its technical strengths, strong CGI, and generally capable acting, the film ultimately stumbles because of its writing. The story twists and turns so much that it collapses under its own weight, leading to one of the most unsatisfying endings I've seen in a while. Instead of feeling clever, the finale feels lazy, relying on a figure-it-out-yourself approach that leaves too many loose ends. I didn't find the film confusing. I found it absurdly overcomplicated and poorly structured. Interestingly, the movie does have its defenders, and I can understand why some might appreciate its ambition. In chronological terms, the story is about a scientist named Anna who helps create an artificial intelligence by raising a child from infancy, forming a genuine mother-son bond. After tragedy strikes and the world faces extinction due to catastrophic flooding, she realizes that the organization she works for values the AI's data more than the child's humanity. Her final choices are driven by love, sacrifice, and denial, but the film never fully earns the emotional weight of those moments. In the end, I'll give the movie credit for trying something different. The ambition is there, but the storytelling simply isn't strong enough to support it. For me, The Great Flood is a messy, uneven experience, technically competent, occasionally engaging, but ultimately disappointing and not worth the time. She ultimately chooses to volunteer as an AI test subject herself, following the same path as John, in an attempt to help engineers develop artificial intelligence capable of genuine emotion. This choice marks the film's second major phase. All of the simulations we've been watching are designed with one goal in mind: to construct a mother's heart that can truly understand unconditional love and self-sacrifice. After tens of thousands of attempts, simulation number 21,499 finally succeeds. The AI versions of Anna and John are then returned to Earth with the mission of rebuilding humanity. On paper, The Great Flood aims to be far more than a standard disaster movie. It positions itself as a philosophical science fiction reflection on love, sacrifice, and what it really means to be human. That ambition is admirable, and for some viewers, even brilliant. I went into the film with no expectations, assuming the flood might simply be symbolic, operating under dreamlike logic. But regardless of abstraction, a story still needs a few fundamental elements to hold attention, starting with compelling, sympathetic characters. Unfortunately, the mother never truly clicked for me as a protagonist, and the child was more irritating than endearing. There's even a baffling moment where she discovers a hidden stairwell that no one else in the building seems to know about, only to abandon it because of some debris. At that point, common sense would suggest clearing the path, not giving up entirely. What could have been an intriguing premise ends up weakened by uneven performances and a messy storyline. I usually enjoy foreign films, often more than Hollywood productions, but this one felt underwhelming on multiple levels. The plot frequently loses focus, briefly regains it, then drifts off again. Films that rely heavily on ambiguity or audience interpretation can work, but only when carefully balanced. Here, confusion often feels like a substitute for clarity. Some defenders argue that negative reactions come from viewers not understanding the artistic vision, but that feels more like an excuse than a defense. Weak writing, inconsistent direction, or miscast roles could all be part of the issue. It's hard to say which element needed the most fixing. If you're looking for a grounded survival or natural disaster experience, you're better off watching something else. This ends up feeling less like an apocalyptic spectacle and more like a man-made, conceptual disaster. From a certain angle, the film leans into strange transhumanist ideas that may push away viewers who prefer emotional realism. Visually, though, there are moments worth appreciating, some striking imagery and large-scale effects that almost work better without sound. Still, from a midpoint onward, the story grows increasingly convoluted and strays far from what most audiences might expect or want. By the end, it's likely to fade quickly from memory. The opening 30 minutes, however, are genuinely impressive. The film begins as a tightly wound survival thriller, delivering tension and scale through effective digital effects that convey the terror of a global tsunami. Kim Demi's performance as Anna is one of the film's strongest assets. She convincingly carries both the physical danger and emotional burden, making her maternal desperation feel authentic and grounded. The major problem arises in the second half, when the film abruptly shifts from a straightforward disaster narrative into an ambitious, puzzle-heavy sci-fi structure. Drawing loose comparisons to time loop and space-themed films, it introduces recursive storytelling and layered timelines. While interesting in theory, this tonal pivot results in an overly complicated plot riddled with gaps. By the final act, the repetition becomes exhausting, and the payoff doesn't justify the build-up. At its core, the film wants to be an emotional exploration of motherhood, trial and error, constant failure, and repeated attempts to do better for one's child, framed through artificial intelligence and global catastrophe. That central idea is solid and, at times, deeply relatable, especially for parents. South Korean cinema is often excellent at pulling emotional responses, and this film clearly aims for that. Sadly, the strong thematic foundation is buried beneath unnecessary subplots, confusing scenes, and narrative excess. By the end, I found myself pushing through rather than being pulled along. The concept resonated with me, and I appreciate what the filmmakers are trying to say, particularly the parallel between human emotion and how an AI might come to understand it. But execution matters, and here, high ambition meets very limited reward. In short, The Great Flood wants to be profound, but for me, it ultimately collapses under its own weight. The execution ultimately collapses into something so chaotic that it feels like the filmmakers lost grip on their own ideas by the final act, or perhaps external interference steered the story off course. Even with all its shortcomings, I'd still land at a July 10th. I'm fully aware that South Korean cinema often leans hard into emotional manipulation, but honestly, they're exceptionally good at it. The film begins with a setup Korean filmmakers tend to handle well, using a recognizable genre as a vehicle to explore a very real social concern. What first appears to be a large-scale disaster scenario gradually exposes something far more unsettling, a society already fractured long before the floodwaters rise. The opening half functions effectively as a survival drama, filled with tension, suffocation, and emotional pressure. The confined setting amplifies both physical danger and psychological strain. By focusing almost entirely on a mother and her child, the film avoids empty spectacle and grounds the catastrophe in something deeply personal and vulnerable. Midway through, the narrative veers sharply into science fiction, and this pivot is bound to divide audiences. The pacing begins to wobble, certain ideas repeat themselves, and the storytelling grows more abstract and allegorical. Not every concept fully connects, and at times the film struggles to match its ambition with narrative clarity. Still, the emotional backbone remains intact. The lead performance holds everything together even when the script falters, and there's a genuine earnestness in its exploration of motherhood, extinction, and the anxiety of a future without legacy. You can argue with its choices, but it never feels emotionally empty. Visually, the film delivers several haunting images. Destruction is framed as tragic rather than thrilling, and the closing moments linger in your mind, reinforcing the idea that the title is meant more as symbolism than literal threat. It's far from perfect and certainly not an easy watch, but its willingness to take bold risks makes it far more compelling than another hollow disaster spectacle. That said, I find myself aligned with many viewers who walked away feeling confused. I understood the plot, but it wasn't the story I expected to experience. One moment, I'm watching an intimate disaster film, more restrained and isolated than anticipated, and the next, it suddenly dives headfirst into territory reminiscent of The Matrix, catching me completely off guard. I enjoy sci-fi well enough, and while this isn't a conventional entry in the genre, it borrows heavily from familiar sci-fi concepts. That could have worked if the execution were stronger, but unfortunately, I don't think it succeeds. From the midpoint onward, the story becomes repetitive, fragmented, and increasingly disorganized. While some praise its originality, I personally don't see much of it, especially for viewers familiar with AI-centric science fiction. Beyond merging an AI concept with a disaster framework, there isn't much here that feels truly fresh. Blending genres can be exciting, but it only works when at least one of the narratives is compelling. Here, both strands feel underdeveloped. The idea of being trapped in a high-rise during a tsunami had promise, but that interest faded quickly. Visually, much of it comes off as overly artificial, and with most of the film confined to a single location, fatigue sets in fast. The AI subplot never generates the intrigue or suspense needed to justify repeated scenarios. If you're going to revisit similar moments over and over, you need engaging characters to anchor the experience. To be fair, the female lead is serviceable, and with dubbed international films, that's sometimes enough. It's hard to fairly judge performances when the dubbing is poor, and here, it often is. The real problem lies with the child character. I'm usually forgiving of young actors, but this one tested my patience relentlessly. From his very first appearance, the nonstop complaining became unbearable. He quickly turned into the film's most grating element. Any scene hinting at his possible disappearance was met with relief on my end, which really says everything. There's only so much tolerance one can have, and listening to endless whining, dubbed or not, pushed me past it. In the end, the trailer does this film a huge favor. It's not the movie it markets itself as, and I suspect many viewers will feel misled. What's sold as a straightforward disaster thriller turns out to be something else entirely. At its core, the story follows a woman and her child attempting to escape a flooded high-rise, but that premise is largely discarded halfway through. There's clearly something more happening beneath the surface. Mysterious, sure, but not necessarily satisfying. The story eventually pivots into a more science fiction-heavy direction, leaning on familiar modern concepts and buzzwords. That shift isn't automatically a bad thing. I usually appreciate films that surprise you or will take an unexpected turn, especially when there's more depth beneath the surface than you initially assume. In many ways, this movie reminded me of Advantageous, a thoughtful sci-fi drama centered on motherhood, emotion, and philosophical ideas about identity. Unfortunately, much like that film, it felt aimed at a demographic outside my own. I can respect movies that want to sit with big ideas for 2 hours and explore them in detail, and I know there's an audience that genuinely enjoys that approach. For me, though, these types of stories tend to lose momentum halfway through. The concepts themselves are intriguing, but the execution often leans so heavily into melodrama that it becomes exhausting rather than engaging. That issue hit early on, largely because the child character is extremely grating at the beginning. The constant whining and yelling made it difficult for me to stay invested from the start. Maybe this is intentional. If I rewatched The Great Flood, it might eventually click the way Terminator 2 did for me after repeat viewings, where I realized John Connor was meant to be irritating at first. Once that perspective shifted, his performance made more sense. This film does drop small hints that suggest it's designed to be revisited, but the idea of sitting through all that noise again honestly kills my motivation. Taken purely as a sci-fi film, it's decent. I'm not particularly drawn to disaster movies to begin with, so when the film abandoned that angle, I didn't mind the change in direction. What disappointed me was not the genre shift itself, but how drawn out and emotionally heavy the new storyline became. It felt repetitive and, at times, tedious. I did enjoy the male supporting character, though, and I couldn't help thinking that if the story had been told more from his perspective, I might have connected with it more strongly. If you enjoyed Advantageous, this film is probably worth your time. But if, like me, you found that movie's second half slow or overindulgent, chances are you'll be reaching for your phone during this one as well. Anyone going and expecting a straightforward disaster thriller is likely to be disappointed. On the positive side, the visual effects are solid, and there are a few genuinely tense and exciting moments. The actress playing the mother also delivers a strong performance, even if I think she'd shine more in a film with a tone closer to Blade Runner. Another movie that explored humanity and identity, but eventually moved forward instead of lingering too long on its themes. The story follows Anna, Kim, Democrat, Michigan, who lives in an apartment building with her 6-year-old son, Jaeon, Kwon Eun-s. When a comet collapses into Antarctica, global flooding begins, and water levels rise at an alarming rate. As their building slowly submerges, Anna and her son attempt to escape. Outside, they encounter Hae-so, Park Hae-so, who claims a helicopter is waiting on the roof. As they climb higher, Anna witnesses raw snapshots of humanity under pressure. Looters ransacking empty apartments, an elderly couple quietly awaiting death, a young girl trapped in an elevator, and a pregnant woman going into labor with her husband beside her. The water keeps rising, the tension intensifies, and then Anna becomes separated from Jin, whose name she pronounces in a way that can be confusing. Ironically, Jaeon dreams of becoming a diver, and that dream is realized in the most horrifying way possible. Visually, The Great Flood is impressive. Limiting the setting to a single apartment complex gives the disaster a claustrophobic, grounded feel. Instead of relying on massive spectacle, the film turns the rising water into a constant, suffocating presence, which works surprisingly well. Where the movie struggles is with its ambition. Anna, a scientist, is deemed more valuable for evacuation than her own child, a decision that immediately introduces disturbing ethical questions. Just when it feels like the story should be wrapping up, the narrative abruptly resets. The survival thriller transforms into a repetitive search, with Anna reliving the same day over and over alongside Hae-so. Each day is marked by a new t-shirt displaying the number of days that have passed, which raises unintentional questions. Who is making these shirts? And how is she being changed while she sleeps? After thousands of resets, the logistics become absurd. This time loop element, reminiscent of Groundhog Day or Edge of Tomorrow, is interesting in theory, but muddled in execution. At times, the film suggests that Hae-so might somehow be a future version of Jaeon. He carries similar emotional scars, particularly feelings of abandonment, which mirror Anna's fear of failing her son. The film heavily implies this connection, but never fully confirms it, leaving viewers unsure whether it's meant to be taken literally or symbolically. That lack of clarity becomes the film's biggest flaw. What causes the day to reset? Why does it eventually stop? The movie never provides satisfying answers. The repeated encounters, the looping structure, and the rules governing this reality are left frustratingly vague, making the experience feel more confusing than profound by the end. The film seems to place its protagonist in a series of encounters that feel deliberately constructed as tests, But tests of what? Exactly? Her humanity? Her sense of guilt? Her priorities as a mother weighed against her perceived importance to the future of the world? These questions hover throughout the story, yet the film never settles on clear or satisfying answers. Because of this, The Great Flood ends up feeling both striking and unfocused at the same time. On a moment-to-moment level, the film often succeeds. The performances are consistently strong, and emotionally, many scenes land with real impact. The tension is effective, the visuals are impressive, and the ethical dilemmas keep the audience engaged. Still, once the credits roll, there's a lingering uncertainty about the film's true intention. Is it fundamentally about motherhood, sacrifice, destiny, or humanity facing extinction? It seems to gesture toward all of these ideas, but without a central anchor, the overall message becomes diluted. Even so, despite its narrative clutter, The Great Flood remains intense and visually compelling. It may not fully come together thematically, but it's gripping enough that the experience itself feels worthwhile. This is clearly a film that expects the audience to do some of the heavy lifting. In that sense, the relatively low scores it has received feel somewhat unfair and perhaps say more about impatient viewers than the movie itself. The flood functions not just as a literal catastrophe, but also as a metaphor for overwhelming human emotion and relentless time pressure. At its core, the film seems to be testing emotional maturity, selflessness, and self-awareness, especially through the lens of motherhood, nurturing, and unconditional presence. There's also an undercurrent of problem-solving and personal realization woven into the narrative. That said, the concept isn't without flaws. The entire premise hinges on an emotional objective that isn't clearly defined within any logical framework. Emotional goals are inherently ambiguous. They can branch in countless directions, with outcomes that logic alone may struggle to measure. For instance, is the ultimate goal simply to save a child? If so, is that purely a physical objective? And if the emotional development of the AI is irrelevant to that outcome, what actually justifies the test? Why is a single human emotional source considered sufficient input? And what happens if the AI becomes self-aware and rejects the process altogether, much like a person waking up from a dream? These unanswered questions weaken the foundation of what is otherwise an ambitious idea. Still, it's difficult to deny that the film is thoughtfully conceived, carefully planned, well acted, and competently executed. Some criticisms feel less like objective analysis and more like frustration with a film that refuses to spoon-feed its meaning. From a technical standpoint, The Great Flood is an interesting and well-crafted production. The special effects are convincing, and several sequences showcase a high level of visual artistry. Despite being set largely within confined spaces, the cinematography frequently feels expansive and deliberate, with some shots displaying remarkable composition. The cast delivers solid performances across the board, and while the actors may be unfamiliar to viewers who don't regularly watch Korean cinema, the film suggests that the industry is more than capable of producing large-scale, ambitious projects. This isn't a traditional blockbuster, but it is engaging and accessible. The central issue, however, lies in the film's lack of clarity about what it wants to be. The story is told in a fragmented structure, partly from the middle, partly from the end, and only fully explained later. Without going too far into spoiler territory, the film follows Kwon Eun-s, a scientist involved in developing AI based on human emotion. She raises an experimental child in a laboratory setting, treating it more as a subject than as a son. After a global catastrophe floods the planet and wipes out most life, the corporation she works for extracts data from the child and sends her into space with other survivors. Her mission is to refine the AI system and help create a new form of humanity capable of colonizing other worlds. As she nears death, her consciousness, and the child's, is uploaded into a simulation. Through countless repeated scenarios, marked by iteration numbers visible on her clothing, she is meant to learn empathy and emotional responsibility. On paper, this is a powerful concept, one that could have rivaled the strongest science fiction anthologies. Instead, the final product feels like an unusual blend of influences: repetitive time loop mechanics, heavy simulation aesthetics, bursts of unnecessary action, and an overemphasis on symbolic motherhood without enough philosophical depth to fully support it. The result is a strange hybrid. There are elements clearly aimed at sci-fi enthusiasts, others that resemble video game-style action, nods to classic cyberpunk simulations, and moments clearly designed to resonate with young parents. Individually, these pieces are intriguing. Together, they form a film that is fascinating, frustrating, and memorable, just not entirely cohesive. The film seems determined to cater to very specific audiences in fragmented ways. There are moments clearly aimed at viewers who tolerate extreme, almost gratuitous cruelty, such as the disturbing data extraction scene involving a bone saw. It's hard not to question the logic here. If the child was engineered in a lab, why wasn't a safer or more advanced access method designed? Then there are elements meant for the cynically inclined, particularly the character of Hae-so, the deeply pessimistic security guard portrayed by Park Hae-so. Abandoned by his own mother as a child, he initially watches with grim satisfaction as the protagonist appears to give up on her son, reinforcing his bleak worldview about human nature. Interestingly, across repeated scenarios, he gradually begins to support her determination to find the child, adding a faint emotional shift that never fully pays off. The problem is that the film tries to juggle far too many ideas at once. It feels unlikely that many viewers will genuinely connect with all of its competing threads. One of the production's biggest weaknesses is its overwhelming lack of focus. It never quite decides what it wants to be: hard sci-fi, action spectacle, emotional drama, philosophical meditation, or full-blown melodrama. The result is a bloated experience dominated by style over substance, and ultimately, it becomes tedious rather than engaging. Without exaggeration, this was one of the most disappointing films I've seen this year. The opening act hints at something promising, establishing tension and characters that seem poised for meaningful development. Unfortunately, that promise evaporates quickly. The narrative spirals into confusion, bouncing between half-formed concepts and introducing twists that muddy the story instead of enriching it. By the midpoint, the film's intentions are completely unclear. Scenes linger far too long, while crucial information is glossed over, making the movie feel both rushed and unnecessarily drawn out at the same time. What could have been a solid thriller collapses into a frustrating, incoherent mess built on a wasted premise. I finished it out of sheer stubbornness, not enjoyment, and regretted nearly every baffling minute. The Great Flood is loaded with symbolism and layered metaphors about morality, human failure, and global collapse. Yet almost none of these ideas are handled effectively. For a sci-fi disaster film, the visual effects often look cheap and repeatedly break immersion. The story leaps into action without earning real suspense or emotional weight. While the opening moments establish atmosphere and suggest potential, the film soon feels hollow and undercooked. It is ambitious in theory, but painfully weak in execution. I don't usually gravitate toward disaster films, but this one initially grabbed my attention, mostly because only the first half actually functions as one. The second half transforms into something entirely different. While I appreciated the attempt to blend genres, it's not a movie I'd ever revisit. There are several reasons for that. First, it's far too long and would have benefited greatly from being trimmed by at least 15 to 20 minutes. Second, the heavy reliance on CGI never quite reaches a level of realism that sells the illusion. Third, the son's character is written to be relentlessly irritating, making it difficult to understand why the mother's desperation resonates emotionally. Fourth, the core concept itself feels flawed. How exactly are artificially created humans meant to repopulate the planet? And finally, the film leaves too many questions unanswered, such as why the security guard develops self-awareness at all. If he exists only as a mental projection of a mother, then what does that imply about everyone else? I've seen many people claim this movie operates on a higher intellectual level that audiences simply fail to grasp. That may be true for some. However, No film should be so exhausting and unpleasant to sit through that viewers abandon it before reaching whatever brilliance it supposedly contains. Whether or not the child behavior is narratively justified doesn't matter if large portions of the audience can't tolerate watching him. The mother's character fares only slightly better. Instead of blaming viewers for not getting it, critics should also consider whether the film itself earns the patience it demands. After all, it was marketed as a disaster movie, so it's understandable that audiences felt misled. When you find yourself rooting for the main characters to die, it's a sign that something has gone fundamentally wrong, no matter how clever the underlying ideas might be. That said, dismissing the child entirely misses the point. The child is the film. From early on, even before fully understanding the plot mechanics, it becomes clear that this is a story centered on the brutal, unrelenting labor of motherhood. Watching a physically fragile woman carry a heavy child up flooded stairwells, scene after scene, confronting impossible physical and emotional challenges, is one of the most harrowing cinematic depictions of maternal sacrifice I've encountered. The film powerfully conveys the idea that motherhood is an absolute, non-negotiable commitment, demanding patience, endurance, and self-obliteration. Even if subtitles fly by too quickly and some dialogue nuances are lost, that central theme remains painfully clear. The film's visual language is instantly recognizable and strong enough that its central ideas reveal themselves relatively early. And that is precisely the point of the test placed upon its protagonist. Whether this young woman can develop and express the layered emotional depth that defines human motherhood. Without venturing into spoilers, the clues are all there for anyone fluent in cinematic symbolism. If those signals go unnoticed, that's less a failure of the film and more a gap in visual literacy. The imagery here is strikingly effective, almost overwhelming in how clearly it communicates its intent. What continues to puzzle me is how audiences build rigid expectations based on trailers. Few critiques feel more baffling than "this wasn't what I expected." What does that even mean before the film has been given a chance to speak for itself? That's not to say every film must be liked or praised, but judging one based on preconceived ideas rather than engaging with it on its own terms does a disservice to both the work and the viewer. This is not an easy watch. It can feel long and occasionally repetitive, but that repetition is not accidental. It mirrors the reality of motherhood itself. Endless responsibility, recurring anxiety, constant vigilance, day after day, year after year. Unlike most things in life, motherhood doesn't end. Speaking from lived experience, that relentlessness feels honest. What begins as a survival story framed by a catastrophic flood slowly evolves into something much larger. The narrative grows beyond physical endurance into a deeper meditation on survival itself. Watch closely and allow the film to reveal what that truly means. This is confident filmmaking. Bold ideas, original concepts, remarkable cinematography, and a narrative that relies on layered visual and symbolic storytelling. It's the kind of film that lingers long after it ends. Much of the backlash surrounding the Great Flood seems rooted not in what the film actually presents, but in what many viewers expected it to be, and what it intentionally refuses to remain. Marketed at first like a conventional disaster thriller, the film later shifts into abstract science fiction and allegory. For some, that tonal transition was jarring enough to break their engagement entirely. That reaction is understandable. What isn't justified is labeling the film as incoherent or meaningless. It is neither. At its core, The Great Flood is not a disaster movie, nor is it truly about climate collapse, infrastructure failure, or survival mechanics. The flood is a storytelling mechanism, not the subject itself. The film is an allegory about motherhood, emotional growth, and the repeated missteps that precede genuine selflessness. Early on, we follow a familiar setup, Na and her young son navigating a city overtaken by rising waters. On the surface, it resembles a standard survival narrative, driven by urgency, fear, and escalating danger. This is where many viewers settle into their expectations, and where disappointment later begins. As the story unfolds, it becomes apparent that the flood is not merely natural but part of a constructed environment connected to advanced artificial intelligence and humanity's long-term survival. This reframing changes everything. The water is no longer just a threat. It becomes a metaphor for emotional overload. The constant escalation isn't about spectacle, it's about pressure. Anna isn't being evaluated for intelligence, strategy, or bravery. She is being measured by her emotional priorities. The film's use of repetition and implied simulation suggests that her journey is cyclical. She doesn't succeed right away because success isn't instinctive. The film argues that true motherhood, particularly the kind rooted in complete selflessness, is not automatic. It is learned through fear, guilt, hesitation, and failure. Each iteration pushes Anna toward the same fundamental question. Will she choose her child above all else, even when logic, efficiency, or broader ideals argue otherwise? Her son exists both as a literal child in danger and as the emotional anchor against which every choice is weighed. The observing system doesn't reward clever problem-solving or moral abstraction. It recognizes only one thing: absolute commitment to the child's survival. That is why the conclusion matters. When Anna's emotional data is finally validated and the mother-child bond becomes part of humanity's continuation, the message is unmistakable. Progress without emotional truth is hollow. Love is not a byproduct of survival. It is its foundation. Some criticisms of the film are fair. Its rules are not always clearly communicated, and the genre shift is abrupt enough to alienate viewers who were invested in a more conventional narrative. But dismissing the film as empty, confused, or random ignores the deliberate structure beneath its surface. This is not a film that spoon-feeds meaning. It challenges the viewer to engage, observe, and feel. And for those willing to do that, it offers something rare. At its core, the film's thematic ambition remains steady from beginning to end, even when the execution occasionally falters. The Great Flood is ultimately a bold and polarizing work, one that asks for patience and a willingness to reconsider expectations. Rather than functioning as a straightforward genre piece, it works best when viewed as an allegory instead of a literal disaster narrative. Many viewers understandably struggled with this approach, especially those expecting a conventional spectacle. Yet when engaged with on its own terms, the film reveals a clear emotional through-line. Motherhood is not a state of perfection, but a relentless process shaped by repetition, failure, and endurance. Only by surviving that internal storm can one truly move forward. Whether the film resonates or not depends entirely on the viewer's readiness to meet it where it actually stands, rather than where they assumed it would go. From the opening moments, the movie plunges the audience into a world teetering on collapse. The visual presentation is striking, capturing the overwhelming scale of the flood with an eerie sense of beauty. Each shot feels deliberately composed, pulling viewers directly into the chaos and the intimate human lives caught within it. The story balances the personal and the epic, interweaving multiple perspectives as fate draws the characters together in the face of disaster. The performances are strong across the board, with one journey in particular standing out, marked by resilience, sacrifice, and quiet hope that lingers long after the scene ends. This is not merely a disaster film. It's a reflection on humanity, our fragile bond with nature, and the cost of survival. The film challenges audiences to confront responsibility, consequence, and the necessity of unity when everything familiar begins to collapse. In that sense, it stands as an ambitious piece of filmmaking, one that leaves viewers visually impressed and emotionally contemplative. For those who value cinema that pairs spectacle with deeper meaning, this is a worthwhile experience and a reminder of storytelling's power to explore resilience in its rawest form. Personally, I haven't encountered another film that kept me this invested in every scene, constantly questioning where it might end up. This is not a passive watch. You have to give it your full attention. Only then does it begin to make sense. Recent Korean cinema has been delivering some remarkably distinctive and visually poetic projects, and this film fits squarely within that trend. The acting is excellent, the effects are impressive, and the script explores territory I haven't seen approached quite this way before. It demands effort from the viewer, but in a rewarding sense. Science fiction, artificial intelligence, and emotional drama are woven together in a way that feels genuinely different. I'd strongly recommend giving it a chance. That said, I couldn't help wishing for an alternate ending. In the final moments, when she appears to be suspended above glowing grid-like patterns, I imagined something else entirely. It looked like the foundation of a new city, and I found myself hoping she would descend into a reborn world, reunited with the child, walking forward together. Perhaps a place created by the boy's AI abilities, free from the cruel humans who subjected them to endless suffering. In a way, the artificial beings seem to develop greater emotional depth than the humans studying them. That contradiction stood out sharply, especially when the scientists, claiming to save humanity, showed none themselves, killing those who helped her and destroying the synthetic child without hesitation. Of course, not everyone will agree with this interpretation. Some viewers may see the film very differently, and harshly so. To them, it might feel like a prolonged apartment flood centered around an insufferable child, lacking narrative momentum. The disaster may appear arbitrary, the characters grating, the CGI unfinished, and the script underdeveloped. For a 2025 South Korean release, critics in this camp might even call it a complete misfire. Yet there's another side to this argument. The film begins as a fairly standard disaster setup, quietly planting seeds for a major tonal shift. When that shift arrives, the movie transforms into something far more playful and thought-provoking. Watching characters adapt, make difficult choices, and navigate the flood becomes unexpectedly engaging. Beneath the surface chaos lies a deeper question: how human emotion factors into the science required for survival in an extinction-level crisis. While the emotional intensity ramps up heavily toward the end, the journey remains compelling enough that the destination still feels earned. We need more films willing to take these kinds of risks. Even when imperfect, works like this push cinema forward, and that alone makes them worth watching. I honestly believe this movie could have been significantly better if the child character hadn't been so unbearable. His constant yelling during moments of danger, then randomly disappearing or hiding when a tsunami is unfolding, completely shattered the tension for me. He single-handedly drained my patience and spoiled what could have been an otherwise decent Korean production. Korean films are usually quite enjoyable, which made this even more frustrating. I can't recall another child character who irritated me this much. The film had potential, but that one performance ruined the experience. I have been waiting for this to finally land on Netflix because I enjoy disaster movies, but trust me, this isn't the one you're hoping for. Removing the child entirely, or at least improving the English dubbing, might have made it watchable. That said, the movie does have strengths. It tells much of its story visually, relying on subtle cues rather than blunt exposition. Viewers are expected to notice details on their own, like the changes in the main character's clothing across repeated story cycles. These visual hints aren't explained outright. You're meant to observe them. If you miss them, it's likely because you weren't fully engaged. If you prefer stories that spell everything out, this film won't work for you. Similarly, anyone unfamiliar with how artificial intelligence concepts function beneath the surface may struggle to connect with the narrative. Despite being a story about emotions and empathy, those who rely purely on surface-level emotional reactions may find themselves confused. On the other hand, if you enjoy thinking through ideas and interpreting meaning, this movie has something to offer. Visually, it's impressive, and the performances are genuinely strong. The cast does an excellent job across the board. The story shares similarities with the Alicization arc from Sword Art Online, particularly in how it explores AI, identity, and human emotion. Fans of that storyline will likely appreciate and understand what this movie is trying to do. The storytelling is carefully constructed, blending science fiction ideas with emotional themes like motherhood and the bond between parent and child. The film starts off strong as a flood disaster thriller with no slow build-up. It pulls you in immediately. Then it pivots into sci-fi territory, focusing on AI designed to replicate human emotions for the survival of humanity beyond Earth. This shift can feel confusing at times, but it eventually connects back to its emotional core. The third act is surprisingly powerful, delivering emotional moments that land effectively. The low ratings feel unfair, likely driven by viewers expecting a straightforward disaster movie and missing the deeper layers. I'd personally give it a solid 8 out of 10. That said, not everyone will feel the same way. Based on the trailers, I initially expected a cheesy, low-budget disaster film. Instead, the movie abandons the disaster angle fairly quickly, repeating the same scenario while pushing a much stranger concept, replacing humanity with emotionally capable AI as a supposed win for mankind. The disaster itself becomes irrelevant after the first few minutes, and a mother-child relationship grows increasingly annoying with each iteration. Once the genre switch happens, the rest of the film feels like a slow march toward an outcome that's already obvious. Some viewers might enjoy forming an emotional connection with the AI characters, but that didn't work for me. The movie gives the impression of a survival story, only to redirect into a confusing sci-fi puzzle that few signed up for. The attempt to blend survival horror with science fiction ends up muddled rather than creative. The storytelling feels weak, forcing the audience to constantly figure out what's going on instead of being guided naturally. It starts to feel like being trapped in a looping glitch, waiting for a meaningful twist that never fully arrives. Character development is also lacking. Nearly halfway through, it's only then revealed that the female lead isn't just an employee but a scientist, a detail that should have been clear much earlier. Overall, the film feels unconvincing and unfocused, and the budget could have been used far more effectively. It's not a great movie, but if you're extremely bored, it might be worth a single watch. One last issue, the opening sequence. While the first 10 to 20 minutes are the strongest part, even they stretch believability. A massive tsunami hits, something resembling a 10-meter wave, and yet the main character survives without serious consequence. Realistically, an impact like that would knock someone unconscious or worse. Moments like this set the tone for the film's ongoing struggle with logic. Thanks for taking the time to read this. I hope you have a great day. On top of everything else, the child somehow survives as well, even after being unconscious underwater for an amount of time that would realistically result in severe lung damage. The film frames this as a miraculous moment, but it comes across as convenient and poorly thought out rather than emotionally earned. That issue extends to how the movie handles the disaster itself. A catastrophe on this scale simply wouldn't unfold the way it's shown here. If an asteroid large enough to rapidly melt Antarctica's ice were approaching Earth, it wouldn't arrive as a sudden surprise. We would detect it far in advance, and the entire planet would experience massive warning signs, global earthquakes, volcanic activity, shifting tectonic plates, and extreme weather, long before any tsunami reached land. None of this groundwork is explored. The story skips straight to mayhem without establishing believable cause and effect. The larger problem lies in the narrative logic. In a true extinction-level scenario, humanity wouldn't respond in isolation. Governments, scientists, and international space agencies would collaborate on a global scale, much like what we've seen in films such as 2012. Instead, the movie narrows its focus to a handful of characters who somehow become central to humanity's survival, hinging everything on emotionally aware AI. That's where the film completely loses me. I don't have an issue with disaster stories being centered on a single country, nor with Korea as the setting, but the leap in logic here feels extreme. The idea that Korea alone is sending people into space to save humanity with emotion-driven AI stretches credibility to the breaking point and ends up feeling forced rather than inspiring. After the strong opening, the movie drifts into yet another AI with emotions will save us storyline. This concept has been explored countless times already, and at this stage it feels tired. So many films and series are leaning heavily on AI-driven plots, and this one doesn't bring anything particularly fresh to the table. What's more frustrating is how the film treats emotional AI as some profound breakthrough, despite the fact that countless other stories have already warned us why that's a dangerous path. Given where real-world AI development is heading, the message feels oddly naive. Overall, the movie comes off as very typical Netflix fare. Slick production values, impressive visuals, but little substance underneath. It's the kind of film you can half-watch while doing chores and not feel like you've missed much. I genuinely don't understand why Netflix keeps investing so heavily in projects like this. Korean cinema once felt more grounded and inventive, but lately a lot of Netflix-backed content feels bloated, glossy, and ultimately forgettable. That said, if you're into time loops, alternate realities, or science fiction concepts, there's still something here for you. It's not revolutionary or mind-blowing, but it does offer a slightly different spin on familiar ideas. Some viewers won't connect with it precisely because it doesn't follow a conventional formula. The film hints at bigger philosophical questions without beating the audience over the head with them, which I appreciated. It's a decent watch if you're in the mood to let your thoughts wander. And honestly, it doesn't deserve the low 5.3 rating it currently has. There are far worse films sitting comfortably above that score on IMDb. I haven't gone through the negative reviews, but I suspect they range from it tried too much to it didn't do enough. When I see all these so-called reviewers with strange usernames tearing this movie apart, I can't help but joke that maybe AI has already taken over, because some of the criticism feels oddly hollow. I've been meaning to say that for a while, even if it earns a few downvotes. I went into this movie completely blind, expecting a straightforward disaster film, and instead it took a sharp, unexpected turn that genuinely surprised me. From that point onward, I was fully engaged and felt like I was getting far more than I anticipated, and in a good way. I understand why some people might be put off by the direction the story takes, but as a sci-fi fan, it really worked for me. The visuals are strong, the core idea is interesting, and it raises thought-provoking questions beneath the surface. If you're open to something that strays from the standard disaster movie formula, there's a good chance you'll enjoy it. I'll stop there to avoid spoilers. For me, this is still something I'd cautiously recommend, even though the experience was far from perfect. I've read many negative reactions, and most of them seem to stem from the film's sharp shift in direction, a change that clearly didn't sit well with a lot of viewers. I didn't particularly enjoy that shift either, but I can still acknowledge a film as worthwhile if it's competently made. In this case, the core idea is genuinely intriguing, though extremely hard to accept. The problem is scale. This isn't speculative science set a few decades into the future. The technology presented here, both in artificial intelligence and advanced construction, feels like something that might exist thousands of years from now, if ever. It stretches credibility to the breaking point. The AI concepts don't feel grounded or relevant to current discussions either. Instead of riding any believable technological wave, the film leaps far beyond it. Because of that, I think this is a movie best approached without overthinking it. Otherwise, the logic collapses very quickly. What also puzzled me was the insistence on forcing an emotional, tear-jerker storyline between the mother and child. It didn't work for me at all. Their relationship failed to resonate, and it felt less like a meaningful narrative thread and more like just one fragment among many disconnected ideas. Was it meant to improve humanity? To redefine what makes us human? Honestly, it's hard to tell. Maybe only the writer knows the real intention. At times, this doesn't feel like a disaster movie. It feels like a disaster of a movie. The child character is relentlessly irritating, whining in nearly every scene, and instead of adding tension, he actively drains it. The repeated flashbacks to the car accident add very little, while the mother's almost superhuman ability to survive underwater is laughable. And even during global annihilation, characters still remove their shoes before entering a home. Seriously? Moments like that completely break immersion. The trailer sold something much more straightforward and engaging, which is why I went in with minimal background knowledge. The opening half actually held my attention and built decent momentum. Unfortunately, things unravel quickly after that. I appreciate what the movie wanted to say, but the execution leaves most viewers frustrated and confused, something clearly reflected in its low ratings. I watched this mainly because I enjoy survival films and wanted to see Kim Dami's performance. After the setup, however, the story turns fully into science fiction disaster territory. The genre shift is abrupt and admittedly jarring, though I can accept that as a personal expectation issue. What I couldn't tolerate was the constant shouting, the repetitive mom calls, and the child's overall presence. Kim Dami does a solid job, but nothing here stands out as exceptional, and unfortunately, the kid ends up overshadowing everything else. In simple terms, the story follows Na, a leading AI researcher attempting to teach machines genuine emotion. She creates an AI child, Jaein, and raises him for several years. After a catastrophic flood, the research team rescues Na and extracts Jaein's brain. Later, during a space mission, an asteroid strikes. Facing death, Na chooses to become an AI herself, uploading her emotional data into an artificial construct. That construct then runs countless simulations, all aimed at one goal: preventing Jaein's brain from being taken.